there, I'm Shawna Robins, CEO and founder of Third Spark. And today I'm doing Authority Magazine interview on how to build stress resilience with a positive mindset. In today's fast-paced world, stress is such an inevitable part of our life, but how we deal and respond to stress will make a significant difference in our overall well-being and our health. Today, I have with me Dr. Jo. She's a doctor of professional counseling who specializes in stress resiliency and helping professionals who struggle with repeated unhealthy coping mechanisms, particularly related to substance abuse. Dr. Jo, thanks so much for being here.
Good morning. Thank you, Shawna. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, so let's talk about the definition of stress. How does it different from anxiety or overwhelm? Can you talk a little bit about kind of that, and then we'll dive into the mindset around it that can really help with stress resilience?
Sure, and that's such a great question because there's so many overlapping experiences with persons' bodies or their cognition, what they're thinking about, and then the behavior that follows. So on a very informal level, I define stress as the experience of, I guess it could be overwhelm, but the perception of sorry, I forgot what I put in the
Oh, it's okay. Just tell me whatever you think. It's no problem. Like,
yeah.
So if someone comes to work with you, what is, how would you help them delineate between, feelings of stress versus anxiety versus overwhelm? And how does that play into, the way that you support people?
Sure. I don't know that a firm distinction is necessary, actually, because the pathway to calm and clarity, the behaviors and habits that I try to work with clients are relatively the same, regardless of how they classify or put a name on what they're experiencing in their mind and body.
Okay. All right. And tell me a little bit about your background. How did you get started in this line of work?
Yeah, so this is what is called an encore career for me. I love that term because it's so positive. Prior to going to school for first my master's and then later my doctorate, I was mostly an at-home mom of 3 closely spaced children. And during that time, when I started having children in 1995, I realized that I didn't have sufficient skills to parent the way I wanted to parent. So I began a research endeavor and eventually became a parenting coach. I owned and operated a couple of licensed daycares and learned how to parent from a positive, non-shaming, non-punitive position. That was still firm with guidelines and expectations, but it didn't move into arbitrary or unrelated punishment for the kids. And when my marriage to my children's dad ended, I needed to redefine, and that's what I did at just over 40. And it was a natural association to move into becoming a therapist.
Okay, and I understand that you work with people who have substance abuse. So can you tell me how that became?
Absolutely. I myself became clean and sober in 1991 when I was 25 years old. And it was in recovery that I met the kid's dad. And so that's where that comes into play. I actually was not going to work with this population when I got my master's. I felt like I had been around them for, at that time, 15 or so years, and that was enough. I was going to do more family and parenting work, but that's not what the universe had in store for me. So
that's great. So health-wise, I was really surprised, actually sort of surprised after COVID to see the cancer levels rise so quickly in association with substance abuse, alcohol mainly. So could you talk to me a little bit about the connection between stress and alcohol use and health and mental well-being, and then we'll dive into mindsets around that people can use.
Absolutely. Some of my material for my practice includes workbooks that take people through identifying their stress level using a a stress scale that's been used for a few decades now. And the reason that's important is because as we are stressed, that impacts the chemical pattern going on in our body, which can lower our immunity, which means we are more likely to catch some of the things that are going around. I'd like to address specifically what I observed happen during 2020. COVID and also in the United States, the social justice issues. It won't be political, but just to acknowledge that it was significant. And so what happened that year, I got tired of the term unprecedented, but it was also accurate. We were confronted, we were really assaulted with a challenge that we had no guidebook for. There was no playbook, and we were scared, we were concerned, we were angry, and we had a lot of experience of stress and feelings. And then the social justice issues also began to accumulate. And at a time when, as a collective, we needed to rely more on healthy coping, access to that began to be cut down by the lockdown. And so if somebody met with their running group as part of their healthy coping, so the physical exercise and the community, they couldn't do that. If they went to some kind of faith community or church, in most cases, they couldn't do that. They couldn't even go to the local bar if that was part of their coping. Even that was taken away. Many families experienced fractures and disconnect because of the differences in approaching social justice issues. And so that further impacted many millions of families in terms of their coping. The lockdown wasn't good for either extroverts or introverts because extroverts need interaction and processing out loud in order to feel centered and be at their best. Often there wasn't enough of that during 2020 for many extroverts. Introverts, one might assume that 2020 and COVID, the COVID response was good for them, but actually it wasn't. They often found that there were people in their sanctuary, in their space, in their pod all of the time, which for an introvert is draining. So at every turn, we were unable to pull from the healthy coping toolbox. So many people started using the unhealthy coping, and that included alcohol in many, many cases, and it included anger, and it included some behavior outside of the agreement in romantic relationships. I'm trying to put that so nicely. There was a lot of cheating that went on, and then that continued after the immediate impact of COVID. Self-harm and just unhealthy coping, and it's coping, it's just unhealthy coping, rose to levels that I haven't experienced in my 58 years. And the fallout of that continues, even though we're approaching 2025.
Yeah, I completely 100% agree with that. So I love that you bring up these unhealthy coping mechanisms. And I think you touch on some that aren't as typically mainstreamed, spoken about. So I think that's really helpful for people that might be able to, really identify with this and really feel seen and recognized by you. What are some of the positive coping mechanisms that you recommend that your clients use or that we use in dealing with stress?
Sure, I try to put them in categories just to help us remember and understand them better. So there's basic biological and hygiene care. So proper rest, proper sleep, proper nourishment, and whatever that looks like for individuals. Making sure that you have you can access medical care to the extent that your situation allows, and just taking care of the basics for your body. The next, I guess I would put under contemplative practices. So there's a lot of science behind contemplative practices such as journaling and intentional gratitude practice, prayer, meditation, mindfulness. Mindfulness is a way of being and also a specific type of meditation, so it kind of cross-categorizes. But contemplative practices, contemplative movement, research supports that contemplative movement have a significant healthy impact on the neural pathways that are developed in a person. So yoga, Tai Chi, I think it's pronounced Naya, and practices that include moving your body, but also having a centeredness of mind. Community, community and social connectedness. When I was completing my doctorate, it was, the research question was, does this curriculum work? I wrote the curriculum and then studied it. And the curriculum was for use for persons with a substance use disorder. When I got to the stress unit module in the curriculum, I thought research would show me that coping skills would be the most needed response, but study after study after study put social connectedness as the first. So helping people find healthy for them social connectedness. Also, in a miscellaneous capture category, I would put things like meaning, purpose, volunteering, creativity, hobbies, things that are energizing to individuals. So that can look like a lot of different ways according to who's trying to develop their healthy coping toolbox.
So many good things you just gave. I really, really like that. So in my line of work, I coach with women and help women who struggle with sleep. And, using these healthier coping mechanisms around stress is a really important part of helping women repair whatever it is that's going on with their sleep. And so what do you think, if you had to list them in order of importance, what do you think would be your top three? I mean, I know you said connectiveness is super important, and I completely agree. So what do you think, if you had to give advice, would be your top three choices?
Biological care and habit hygiene around that, social connectedness, and I would encapsulate the third as learning to manage your energy. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that one. How would you define that?
So I would start with talking about how we are each individually energized and depleted in very specific ways. So when I work with clients, I help them identify on their list, in their context, what depletes them and what energizes them. Because our experience of stress and our capacity to have stress resiliency or even sleep, right, is very much dependent on how we are experiencing life in those moments. And so becoming aware of this setting depletes me, this setting energizes me. I'll use a personal example. I live in Texas, in the Houston metro area. And in order to keep my electric bill somewhat manageable, I keep the blinds and the curtains closed in the summer. This summer, I'm in a new to me house, and I realized as the summer progressed that my mood was correlating with the lack of natural light. And that might seem minor, but it really wasn't. It was very much a part of the biological process of finding holistic and healthy ways to elevate my mood. And so working with clients to become aware of what are their specifics, what's their natural light equivalent, who drains them, who energizes them, what interactions can they manage. Some we can eliminate, some we can minimize, others we have to engage, but what can we do to prepare for that engagement? So all of those things fall into the category of managing your personal energy.
Yeah. Wow. That's really powerful. I really like that. There are so many things as women, especially, we are so biologically hardwired to be the pleasers, be the nurturers, keep the peace. And then we end up tolerating so many things that become intolerable to our systems, but we don't know how to get out of it. We don't know how to start speaking up or asking for help or laying down boundaries or, whatever it is that we know we need to do for our own mental and physical and spiritual well-being. So what tips do you have for people who are maybe sustaining things that are not supportive to them? How do they make the steps either in their mindset or an action step to be able to A, identify it, and B, sort of create a container, however you teach, around it so that they can, protect themselves a bit more?
Right. So it starts with the awareness that I was speaking of, knowing who you are as a person, and then working either with very selective resources on your own or a coach, a provider, somebody who can help you then manage the distress that can come with saying no or saying yes or creating boundaries or because what happens is we are biologically wired and socialized to have a certain role in society and in community. And when we begin to change that, it can feel very distressing. We take on the anxiety of the person or the entity or the other context, and their discomfort with a change in the pattern. And so learning to be comfortable with no, thank you, that doesn't work for me is a complete thought. Learning that we don't always have to explain our boundaries, because in explaining that often implies that it's up for negotiation. And so learning healthy boundaries and how to assert those, and if necessary, learning how worthy we are of those boundaries, and how necessary it is for us to be at our personal best, aligned with values, our energy, our capacity, and that, I don't want to use a cliche oxygen mask metaphor, but the reason it became cliche is because it's accurate. We need to take care of us before we can be anything of value to others.
That just applies to all women globally, right? I mean, I look at, for example, the effects of insomnia on women globally. 1 in 4 women dealing with chronic insomnia, and I think just that concept that you just touched on of worthiness, that concept of, taking on somebody else's pain and anxiety when you do start to sort of reshape the relationship of asserting your needs more. All of those things are such nuances, but so important for women to be able to have a resource like you that they can turn to, and someone that they can talk to, and a place where they can feel supported and be encouraged to just be, more authentic, so that they can take better care of themselves and lower their stress level, and see that their life improves because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. As we were sitting here, my dryer sound went off, and it reminded me of a poem. I wish I could find it. I've looked, I've Googled, I can't, but I read a poem when I was, when my children were young, about how women operate by sounds. Has the dryer stopped? Has the dishwasher stopped? Is somebody at the door? What are the dogs up to? And trying to keep everything together by sounds.
Is the baby crying? Is that a hungry cry, or is that a hurting cry? All sorts of things.
Yeah. And having so much on our radar that it's just filled to over capacity.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, so how can people get in touch with you? Where can they find you on social media and the web and all that good stuff?
Yeah, so I'm pretty findable as Dr. Joe Recovery, sober in the C-suite. And you can, I'm working on a website that supports professionals and executives that had sober in the C-suite, professionals and executives trying to address their unhealthy coping. And so that will be up soon. I'm about to launch a challenge for November, an intentional gratitude challenge. Comes along with a workbook, daily emails, encouragement, a couple of live check-ins with me. And yeah, so I'm findable on TikTok, YouTube, via email, and my website will be up soon. My private practice website is joanneketch.com.
Okay, great. And the November challenge that you mentioned, is that something that people can sign up for on your website?
Yeah, there will be a specific link, and so it'll be available on all of my socials, link in bio, and it's free.
That's amazing. What a great
Yeah.
resource. All right. Thank you so much for joining me today. It was such a pleasure to be able to talk to you.
Thank you.